is about to happen at a level that's almost incalculable, extraordinary, unprecedented. It makes something like the Roman Empire look trivial. So just think about that. The announcement of the extraterrestrial presence, worldwide engagement, open contacts with multiple civilizations.
The revelations about ATIP may be clues that there's an agenda here. This may be government trying to slowly drip feed this information out to the public in such a way that there won't be out-and-out panic. It may be a way of slowly but surely acclimatizing people to the reality of this phenomenon.
The fact that the New York Times published a Pentagon story is extraordinary, and nobody really cared. So, to me, that means that while we are all talking about that we may be connected to extraterrestrials, that this knowledge is within us. It's hardwired so that, hey, if they're coming, it won't be panic because we come from them. I do think that the world is ready for this knowledge, and I think that it would be the most revolutionary story in the history of mankind.
Objects are Russian or Chinese, but your piece points out Russia and China have literally lost aircraft chasing these things. So they're not Russian or Chinese.
So we have a declassified British government document, which is a research document into UFOs, that points out a couple of times, actually, that about 4 Soviet pilots, perhaps Russian pilots since, were lost trying to engage these aircraft.
Were killed. Does it say how?
Doesn't say how. And I haven't been able to find out how. I did hear from someone, though, engaged was an appropriate term to use, so that they were trying to shoot these things down, was the implication.
Okay, so if Russia, China, and the U.S. have all had this experience, then these are not.
These are not. And I think that's a pretty clear assessment on the part of the military.
These are not made by human beings.
No. Well, yeah, I think that's a fair assessment based on the capabilities, especially with some of the aircraft that the Navy have seen in recent years are manifesting, right? That you have things that are going hundreds of knots under the water, anti-gravity, instantaneous hypersonic acceleration. That you have basically capability performance without jet propulsion.
Right.
This stuff is not stuff that China or Russia have anywhere near the capability
or that physics can explain.
Exactly.
So why is the Pentagon lying about this? Why have they lied about it for so long?
I mean, that's the golden question. I think one reason is that a lot of people in the Pentagon fully don't understand what this is. I think they come to the conclusion it ain't from here.
Yeah.
But beyond that, they're somewhat flummoxed.
And you think they have come to that conclusion?
Yes, confidently.
They think this is extraterrestrial, just to be totally blunt about it.
Or extra-dimensional, something extra, let's put it that way.
It's not from this world.
Not from this world, and not from Elon Musk. You know, some people say maybe it's some secret billionaire somewhere. It's too advanced. It's also quite extraordinary the degree to which when these things happen, right? When we've seen a lot of, or some coverage, not as much as we would want to see on the Navy in particular, but the nuclear synergy, the nuclear identifier.
Yes.
That a guy, Robert Hastings, wrote a book about this 10, 15 years ago, which is at some point probably going to become a bestseller because it talks about these things actually deactivating, in a couple of cases, US and Soviet ICBMs in the Cold War. So whatever these things are, intelligent machines, they're not ghosts, blips on the radar, also their ability to move, both through space, air, and hundreds of knots underwater in terms of friction.
Nothing can go hundreds of knots. I mean, the whole thing is... So we're out of time, unfortunately. We should have led the show with this.
We're going against the wind. The wind's 120 miles to the west. Look at that thing, dude.
A close encounter spotted by a U.S. Air Force pilot off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida.
Oh, my gosh, dude. Wow, look at that, man.
Shot in 2015, this video is among the growing number of UFO sightings in recent years. So much, the U.S. military gave a classified briefing on Capitol Hill last week titled Threats to the Safety and Security of Our Aviators.
One of the key takeaways I'd have is that the military and others are taking this issue seriously, which I think in previous generations may not have been the case.
Even U.S. President Donald Trump weighed in.
I did have one very brief meeting on it, but people are saying they're seeing UFOs. Do I believe it? Not particularly.
The fighter pilot who saw this object first thought it was a drone, but then noticed it had no visible engine and was faster than anything he's ever seen.
That was one of the most amazing things to us, or at least to me, was that these objects would be out there all day, and the speeds that they're exhibiting, as well as the flight characteristics. There's no platform or really energy source that I'm aware of that could allow something to stay in the air as long as these objects were.
And it's not just confined to the U.S. nearly 1,000 Canadians reported UFO sightings last year alone. Most were chalked up to low-flying planes, drones, or a simple mistake, but not all of them.
Out of the 1,000 or so sightings a year, about 5% remain unexplained.
Yes, and that 5% doesn't automatically mean spaceships. It simply means these are cases that are a little more puzzling than usual and they need a little more investigation, and some of them just never do get explained.
The unexplained, skeptics believe, could all be secret military testing on classified missions.
It's probably one part of the military not telling the other part of the military what they're up to, for a good reason.
But those fighter pilots say that's not how it works and are urging further investigation, believing the truth is out there.
My gosh.
Richard Madden.
But I'm pretty sure it's the same backseater took both of these videos. Took the Go Fast video and took the gimbal video. And my buddy was on the flight with the gimbal video. But these things, so I called my bud because I'm like, hey, how many people are seeing these things? They're like 60 or 70.
60 or 70.
60 or 70 people had seen these things on radar. And I said, well, what do you do? And they said, well, we put out a NOTAM, which is a notice to airmen that just says, hey, these things are out there, so just be careful because we don't want you to hit one. Yeah.
Whoa.
And it's kind of like ours. You go, because you would ask, who do you tell? Well, everyone knows. Well, what do you do? And I said, well, because it was all white and it didn't have any markings on it and it didn't have any wings and it didn't have any rotors and it outperformed anything that we have. I think if I would have painted China or Russia on the side.
Is this the gimbal video?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's the same pod.
Start from the beginning, Jamie?
What we're looking at. And when the crew finds it, now what you're not seeing, you're seeing the targeting. When you hear them start talking, when you listen to the video, you'll hear the guy go, dude, look, they're all over. Look at the SA page. So we have a situational awareness page. And whatever the radar is getting returns on, it'll show up. It's kind of like our God's eye view in the airplane. So the pod can only look at one thing. So he designates that as his primary target. So that's where the pod is staring. The radar is still seeing everything else. So what they're actually seeing in this video is when you see the object that he's tracking. When I was talking to one of the other pilots, he said there's actually, when you see the radar video, there's it almost looks like a formation in front of him, like 5 smaller ones that are moving in front of it. And then they turn, so like a formation, these things turns and starts going the other way. And then while they're filming the gimbal video. And that's kind of the comms when you hear, dude, holy cow, look, they're all over.
This is unreported new information that he's actually saying right now. Everybody knows this video. This is the one that they say turns like the Lazar craft, like belly first. However, what he's telling you right now is something that is not public yet. He's telling you that there was a V formation of other objects that the public has yet to see.
You're not going to.
You're not going to.
It's a radar tape.
But
you're not going to.
There were more objects surrounding this, is what he's telling you right now, which is fascinating because the world doesn't know that yet. Just so you know, I mean, that's brand new. That's never been reported by New York Times, anybody.
Okay.
So you can go ahead and hit play. So the cool thing with this is, when he goes into, so he's in IR mode right now. You're still seeing no plume. He's looking 47, so they're actually turning into it. So it's starting to pull it back towards the nose. See how the number at the top is decreasing? And it's against the wind. Now he's in TV mode, and this thing's going to just start to roll. And you can kind of see it's got that aura around it.
Mm-hmm.
He said they were saying that the ones with the squares inside that look like the beach ball were the same. And this thing's just hanging out. So it's on the airplane's in a left-hand turn, and it's now it's right in front. Yeah, it's just rotating.
Now, this is how Lazar described.
Yes.
Don't put that up. Right. Lazar described that these things would lay flat, and then when they would travel, they would turn up on their side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they maneuvered. So this is very similar.
Eerily similar to the propulsion system that Lazar talked about, and that's why this video, we're seeing it very differently now, especially with what we know about Lazar. But the idea is that it would fly belly first in high speed mode. So if they have, these are gravity propelled. This is something that's known within the government. They're trying to back engineer it. They're trying to understand it. We know there's a program currently that they said is gone. However, it is currently active to study this. These things will turn belly first, these saucer type looking ones. And then that's the high speed mode because they focus allegedly, these gravity wave amplifiers. Look, this thing turns mechanically. There, again, no typical form of propulsion as an expert, is telling you this is not a glitch. This is seen by multiple radars, multiple people. Commander Fravor was so close to it. This is something that is not aerodynamic, and it could move in ways and fashions. When he's underplaying it, when we first talked, the idea of this thing going bup, 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 it's instantaneous acceleration back and forth. There's no slowing down, no turning, like a ping pong ball. He said to me, our first talk, ping pong ball in a glass. Nothing moves like that with traditional reactionary propulsion. Somebody has technology that we don't have in our inventory at all.
So this is counterintuitive, the way it goes from being aerodynamic to being unaerodynamic when it goes sideways and then flies belly forward.
That's correct. Well, it's not. It's, you know, if you talk, because I was just talking to the guy the other day, and he said the irony with this is these things would be out there for hours. We don't have, you know, a high performance airplane does not have hours worth of gas. I mean, you know, Hornets, if we don't have aerial refueling, you know, and we're actually out doing a mission and fighting and going fast, you know, you're talking hour and a half, and you're coming back to land. Some airplanes are even less, you know, based on their size. You know, so like an F-16 doesn't have external fuel tanks. It doesn't have a lot of gas. And the Soviet airplanes are the same way. The MiG-29 does not have a lot of gas. The Su-27, Su-30s have a lot of gas.
Weight, because of
its weight, performance, size of the airplane. So, you know, even our intercontinental bombers like B-2, they still take off and they aero refuel. They keep topped off so they can get to range. That's how we extend things. You got something like this that's coming down. You know, just think of the physics. So just I'll use my incident because that's the one I really know the best is you've got an object coming from above 80,000 feet. So I'll just tell you that 80,000, it's somewhere around 70 to 80,000 feet is where you can actually start to see the curvature of the Earth. You know, so that's considered space. So they're coming from above that. They're coming straight down. They stop at around 20,000 feet. They hang out for 3 hours, and then they go straight back up. So, and I know you had Elon on the show. So SpaceX is really excited because they can launch a rocket and then they can have the booster come back to Earth and actually land on a pad. Very impressive engineering feat. Next to this technology, that's like a Model T next to a Porsche. I mean,
out of that, and I agree that it will be science that makes the discovery. And I think the next generation of telescopes that are being built might help us answer that question one way or the other. If there are civilizations out there with brains, one thing they might be doing is TV and radio, because it's quite a logical thing. And the next generation of radio telescopes should pick that up.
Is it possible, though, that, you know, intelligent life has evolved beyond that, as perhaps we're evolving towards computers, and they look nothing like us at all, and they don't need to look like us?
That's very possible as well. And in fact, I went to a scientific conference in 2010 when I heard a NASA former chief historian say, we may be in a largely post-biological universe. And he was talking about artificial intelligence. And that might, of course, be a way that life forms could survive the rigors of space, whether it's the time involved to travel or indeed hostile things like cosmic rays.
Do you think it is still a toss-up that there's life other than what we know about on Earth?
I actually agree that there is probably going to be a universe teeming full of life, unless we thought there was something unique about Earth, unless we thought that life here was some sort of miracle, whether religious or secular. Really, the factors that gave rise to life here should replicate throughout the cosmos, and I think it is just a matter of time till we find them, or maybe they find us.
I mean, you look into UFOs and things like that. What, in your view, is the best evidence we've had of there being some kind of extraterrestrial life?
Well, most of the sightings we looked at were misidentifications, but the believers only need to be right once. And we did, in the Ministry of Defense, have some cases where these things were seen by pilots, simultaneously tracked on radar, and where we got some very good photos and videos that even defense intelligence staff specialists couldn't debunk. So in amongst the Chinese lanterns and the weather balloons, there is some good stuff in the files too, so who knows?
And the pictures and descriptions of people who claim that they've been abducted by aliens give of the creatures that abducted them tend to be fairly consistent. Is that simply sort of crowdsourcing of information, do you think?
I think it could be people just picking up on the memes that they see in sci-fi movies. Maybe the reality is stranger than we could ever imagine. But I mean, I think that question of whether or not we're alone is one of the biggest and most profound questions we can ask. And I really think it's one of those questions where we might genuinely, sooner rather than later, get a definitive answer.
Question. Are we really alone in the universe? You know, there have been recent reports of encounters and sightings of UFOs giving timely thought about proof of extraterrestrial life. Giorgio Tsoukalos is one of the foremost ancient astronaut experts in the world. He continues his exploration of aliens and signs of alien visitation on the History Channel in Ancient Aliens. Giorgio, welcome, sir. Good to have you here.
How you doing? Pleasure to be here.
It's a very timely and earthly interview. I have to ask you, sir, what do you make of all these recent UFO sightings? And we were talking about this right before the interview. We're a big Navy state here in Maryland. The Navy pilots, they have been seeing some things. That video has come out. This is amazing.
Yeah, I think that in December of 2017, we've experienced as a society a paradigm shift, because it's the first time that the U.S. government has come forward and not only admitted UFO research, but also supplied video clips. Video clips are absolutely insane and wonderful. And just by the reaction of those fighter pilots, they were quite excited to witness what was going on.
I mean, it was amazing to hear that their voice and then see that UFO pull away from a military jet. You know they have some speed. What do you make, and what signs have you discovered that suggest the Earth has been visited by extraterrestrial life?
Well, my personal opinion is that all these ancient mythologies and legends that we have of the quote-unquote gods with a lowercase g descending from the sky, that they aren't necessarily just a figment of our ancestors' imagination, but that perhaps our ancestors actually witnessed something, because it's not us ancient astronaut theorists who are proposing these ideas, it's our ancestors telling us someone came from the sky. So what if they were our first teachers? And by the way, those Navy pilots, one of them is on record saying, "I can't wait to fly one of those things."
It gives me a little bit of a chill. I mean, I guess the bottom line is many of us feel there's something out there. These ancient people, they wouldn't even been confused by, you know, maybe it was a different kind of jet from a different country or something like that. That wouldn't even have been a question back in those ancient times. So give us another thought on that, and also, how do you think this has impacted the world in general?
Well, the idea of the ancient astronaut theory is basically, it's observing or exploring cargo cult behavior. And cargo cult behavior is an accepted term in anthropology and ethnology, where if a technologically advanced society comes in contact with a technologically primitive society, then the technologically primitive society starts to worship the technologically advanced society. This has nothing to do with intellect. It has everything to do with the technological frame of reference. So if someone 5,000 years ago descended from the sky, those people automatically have achieved godlike status, even though they were people like you and me, and you know, here we are.
It's just an amazing topic, and one that will continue to, I think, blow our minds. We know we'll be seeing you on the upcoming season of Ancient Aliens. Giorgio, thank you so much for being here on Midday Maryland, sir.
Was the disc, the flying saucer that I worked on. This was a small reactor about the size of a hemisphere, about the size of a basketball, on a metal plate, and when it was running, it produced a gravitational field of its own. Anyway, this device was producing that. And Barry said, almost like he was bragging, "Go ahead, try and touch the sphere." And I couldn't. It pushed my hands away, just like two like poles of a magnet.
How did they turn it on?
The reactor?
Yeah.
The hemisphere is removed. There's a small tower in the middle. When you put the hemisphere on, the reactor activates.
the reactor shuts down, it's load sensing. So if there's no load on the reactor at all, it shuts down. When there's a load present on it, it starts up again. You can consider it an electrical load. There's no wiring that connects any of the subcomponents together whatsoever. They just have to be in the immediate vicinity. There was some progress. I mean, we did identify, at least we think, some processes and had a rough idea, we think, of what was going on. But I think this is a problem that they've had for a long time. And, I was replacing somebody that Barry worked with prior to me. And I think there was some horrific accident that I didn't have a whole lot of information on, but, Barry alluded to that.
A horrific accident, like where someone died, or?
Yeah, where somebody died.
Because they were trying to tamper with things or figure out how something worked?
Yeah, the reactor in particular.
But yet he let you touch it.
Yeah, I think what they were trying to do was cut into one.
Oh,
now,
Jesus.
they had more than one there, and that was supposedly there was an unannounced nuclear test, and that's what it was. At the time, remember, they were still doing underground nuclear tests at the test site. But from what I understand, according to Barry, there was an attempt made. Now, this must have been a pretty desperate attempt because it's not a very scientific process to analyze something that way. But it looked like they used a plasma cutter or something like that to cut into an operating reactor.
How many of these things did they have?
They had nine craft altogether. I only got hands-on with one of them, so I can't really say how the others operated.
Did you see the other ones?
Yeah. At one time, and only one time, the bay doors that between the hangars were all open, and I could see all the way through.
And were they all exactly the same?
No, they were all different.
Different shapes?
Yeah. So there was some paperwork that indicated that this was from the Zeta Reticuli star system. Now, how they obtained that, I haven't the slightest idea. But it wasn't just from the Zeta Reticuli star system. It was what they called ZR3. So it was a third planet in that star system. So there was no other information about it other than that's supposedly where the craft came from. Now, is that true? I don't know. I have no way of verifying that. But that was printed in the same materials that referenced the reactor.
So there's a plate, there's this thing that looks like a half a basketball, and when it's on, you can't come anywhere near it. You can't touch it.
Right.
What is gravity about that? Like the concept of gravity to most people is gravity is bringing something towards it.
Right. Well, I guess you would say it's anti-gravity. Mm-hmm. It's gravity shifted 180 degrees. It's anti-gravity.
And did they have any understanding about what could possibly create this effect?
Well, they knew there was a fuel source in it, and they were proficient at making it work. We played around with the parts long enough before I got there where they could make the reactor operate, take the fuel out, and know that it makes it work. How exactly what was going on in the reactor remained a mystery at the time. I think we made some progress on what was going on inside, but I don't think anybody really knew anything. They could just watch what was going on and make note of it. The square base of it was essentially like a cyclotron, which is a small particle accelerator, a circular one. Particle accelerators, linear particle accelerators, are just a, long tube essentially, and they accelerate particles with high voltage and, radio frequencies till they reach high speeds. But a cyclotron does that in a small circular area. And there's this very heavy element fuel, element 115, something that wasn't on our periodic charts at the time.
But it is now.
It is now, yeah.
What was your reaction to having this stable element 115 that wasn't even supposed to exist?
Well, everything was impossible.
Right.
I mean, down to the metal. I did get a chance to look inside the craft on only one occasion. And this was important because where the reactor sat might have been critical to how it operated, since everything operates without any interconnection, so the placement of components might be critical. So they allowed me to go inside and look at it. Again, I forgot where the hell I am.
So you're going into this craft, and what are you thinking when you're inside of it? Like, what are you seeing?
It's it's a very ominous feeling because there are no, first of all, everything is one color. It's like a dark pewter color, and there are no right angles anywhere. It's as if somebody took, I've said this before, somebody took a model and fashioned it out of wax and then heated it just for a short time so everything melted. Everything looks like it's fused together. Everything has a radius of curvature where two items meet. It's a really weird looking thing. There was almost nothing other than a small foldable hatchway that looked recognizable.
So you get inside this thing, and it's designed for something that's much smaller than a human being.
Yeah, you can't really stand up till you get to the very center of it.
And how tall are you?
I'm 5'10".
And what do you think this was designed for?
I'd say something close to half my height.
Wow. So these little 3-foot tallish creatures.
Yeah, and the seats were small too. I mean, obviously it was made, for something small. But there is no, there's nothing else in there. There's just seats, the reactor, and some of the subcomponents. There's no control panels. There's no bathroom. There's no decorative components or artwork or anything that you would recognize or trim. I mean, it's just a very bare bones thing.
You're not seeing any screens?
Well, there are archways around it that are part of the superstructure, and that one of the archways can become transparent. When I was in there was another group working on one of the archways, and you could call that a screen, more or less.
So through that archway, it would maintain the solidity, the solid, whatever metal it was.
Yeah,
but you could see
through it. Yeah, it just became transparent. Yeah. I saw that happen once or twice before I left.
Did you ask any questions about what the fuck that
No,
was?
there's no asking questions.
There's no asking questions.
No. And I don't know if the craft is made of, an advanced metal or a ceramic. It was cold to the touch, so, I would lean more towards a metal.
You're not allowed to ask questions.
No.
And when you see this craft and you're inside, was there any indication that there was an area that they would use to control it, to pilot it? Was there a pilot seat? There
were 3 seats. They sat around. The reactor was in the dead center of it, and then equidistant around there were 3 seats. That's all. There was a large. They're not consoles. They're large rectangular objects, also spaced equidistant around the center. There's nothing on them. There's no buttons. There's no lights. There's no control.
Look the same color, the same
Everything
thing.
is the same
it's
color.
It's just a different shape.
Right. And directly underneath them, there's 3 levels in the craft. The main level is what we're talking about. Directly under that, those are the gravity amplifiers, the big rectangular objects. Underneath them are the gravity emitters that look like, for lack of a better word, a trash can hanging on a pipe. 3 of those. And then the top layer, this is just my personal belief, I think that has to do with a navigation or their version of a computer with some planar panels, sensor panels around the craft that we would call portholes, but they're not portholes. They're just black areas. And I think that just determines its position in space. But I physically was in the center section, and I stuck my torso in the bottom section and hung upside down so I could see how the gravity amplifiers were positioned.
What is the roughly the size of this thing?
I don't remember from being there, but after all this stuff was over, I had John Andrews, a guy from the Testers Model Corporation, and we sat down and tried to figure out from what I saw and known sizes of things, and we came up with 52 feet in diameter. And
so
I think that's
fairly small.
Yeah, so I think that's a reasonable guess.
Now, you said there's 9 of them, and you got a brief glimpse at the other ones. How are they different?
Oh, they looked completely different. One looked like I called a Jell-O mold, and it looked like a classic Jell-O mold with the rippled sides to it. One was a very flat disc, like a straw hat or something like that. That was sitting up on its edge, and the thin part of it it looked like a projectile had been fired through the edge of it. So I don't know if they were attempting to see if the metal could be penetrated, or if that's where the thing came from. Maybe it was shot down. But that was the only one where I saw there was, actual physical damage to it.
And that one was roughly the same size? They
were kind of too far away to tell. We started playing around with the emission from the emitters, the gravity wave itself, and saw what we could do with it and how it was focused. So we really spent all our time just trying to see what the stuff can do and what we can control.
Did you know at all how they were piloting it? Because they were doing some tests where they were having these things fly around in the sky.
We went out there, and the craft was already outside the hangar and was just preparing to lift off. Now, they were in communication with somebody in the craft.
So there was a person in the craft?
Yeah, there was certainly a person in there. Now, it's not a comfortable place to be in because it's small, so the guy has to be sitting on the floor in the middle, my best guess.
And this is the same specific craft that you worked on? Because that was the only craft that you were in.
The only one that I touched and worked on. And it quietly lifted off the ground, which was incredibly impressive to see.
Quietly or silently?
Well, quietly, because
Did it make some sort of a noise?
It produced a little corona discharge from the bottom. A corona discharge is kind of a high voltage brush, little bluish glow discharge. As it was lifting off the ground, you can hear a slight hiss sound. Now, as soon as it cleared the ground by about 5 or 10 feet, maybe even less than that, the hissing stopped and the blue glow disappeared. So it lifted off quietly, and then it hovered silently, if you want to be specific. For that particular time, it took off, moved a little around to the left and right, and then sat back down. The craft itself, they communicated with it with because I saw the guy talking in a regular VHF radio to the person in the craft, and I even saw the frequency that was on the frequency counter of the communication, the transceiver there. But what's weird is he shouldn't be able to communicate with the craft with a radio. I mean, that's something we talked about for a while after.
Why should the frequency bend around the craft?
Well, you really have to look at the way the gravity wave comes out of the craft. There's the reactor's in the center, and there's a waveguide that goes up to the top. There's actually a small appendage that sticks out of the top of the craft, and it produces a heart-shaped gravitational distortion around the craft. Now, if the craft is sitting in the air and you walk underneath it and look up, you actually cannot see the craft. The light bends around it. You're bending gravity, bends light. It bends radio waves. It shouldn't be possible to communicate with a craft that has an envelope around it that's distorting all forms of energy. But they were apparently in contact with it.
And did they discuss this with you? I mean, they said they wanted you to see it.
No, they just wanted. No, they didn't discuss anything with me. It set